Hello and welcome to Miniature Adventures, and it's time for another update from the Operations Room. So I actually forgot to do an update at the end of January. I just busy and it just completely slipped my mind. So this covers a slightly longer period, but to be honest, I've been bashing away at some projects, so not a lot has happened. Actually, that's not strictly true. There's been a lot of gaming going on, a lot of painting going on, so there's quite a few things to talk about this week. So we're going to start with a hobby update. I've been, as I hinted at there, I've been getting a reasonable amount of gaming in. Managed to get an in-person game in down at the Shed of War, a Napoleonic game. Not normally my best period in terms of performance, but I was the French commander and we had a solid plan, we stuck to it, and we managed to pull off a win, and I was very happy with that result. And if anyone knows my gaming history, I took the cavalry wing of the army, and I'm not renowned for my ability to handle cavalry, but this game things started to come together. I had some horse artillery and some reasonably light cavalry, and performed pretty well, while the rest of the army did the proper job of grinding down the Austrians in this case. So yes, we got a victory. That was a really good game to start off with. And then I've had a online game, a remote game with Jonathan Freitag. Again, he put on a game for some of the rejects. There was about 6 of us, I think, involved in the end, of us all dialing in via Zoom, and he put on a multi-week game, as these things are quite large, playing Montebello, which is the Italian War of Independence. Again, me, Ray and Steve were playing the Austrians this time. We had, the scenario was that we had pushed back the Sardinians, captured some ground, but a lot of our reserves were on the wrong side of a river, so they only had 2 crossing points, and the French were about to counter-attack, and boy did they. At one point, by the end of the first day's gaming, I was convinced we were going to get a bashing, because we'd taken some significant casualties, not helped by the fact that I foolishly moved a column of infantry a little too close to the French without reverting them back into line, and when they were subsequently charged by 4 French units, they were wiped out to a man. My dice rolling was appalling, but it didn't help that I had them in the wrong formation and in the wrong place. Lesson learned for another time. I've got to pay more attention to that. So I was feeling fairly downhearted by the time we'd finished our first day's gaming of Montebello. But saying that, my job in this particular game was I took what was known as the centre wing, and I basically was bringing up all the reserves from the other side of the river, and my preoccupation for most of the game was to get stuff across. There was a railway bridge and a road bridge, that, like I say, 2 choke points to cross this river, and my job was to try and get as much across that river as possible, so that the other 2 players, who were basically dealing with most of the fighting throughout the game, were in a position to then fall back and swap over with me at a set point. You know, if we could get our reserves across the river, we had a numerical advantage. So my obsession was basically clearing some space, encouraging my fellow players to clear a bit of space either side of those 2 crossing points, so that I could get our reserves across. So week 2 of the game, these were played on a Monday evening here in the UK, but early morning for Jonathan, I imagine, because he lives in Washington State. Our second day of the battle was about us getting those final reserves into position, and so we could bolster our lines, because the 2 divisions rather, that were on the table of our side were pretty beaten by this point, and they wouldn't have held much longer. But we timed it just about right. We managed to get some of my brigades across the river and slipped them in and reformed a new line, fresh troops, a strong position, and by that point the French had taken so much damage. There was a couple of really concerted and very dangerous attacks towards the end of the game. Now, bear in mind, we did all of this with a lot of fog of war. None of us knew really how damaged our own units were. We had an order of battle, if you like, to start with at the beginning of the first game, but we weren't given an update at the end of that game about the condition of those troops, and we certainly didn't know anything about the condition, number or reserves of the enemy, which is only, to be fair, the commander wouldn't have known. So we didn't realise that by the end of the second day's game, and by the time the game came to a conclusion, we were one unit away from breaking. But we managed to make the French break first. They retreated rather sensibly, because they couldn't have pressed on any further. They were massively overextended, and so the Austrian side, we were able to get another win. I'm very pleased with that result. That was unexpected after the first day's game. I genuinely wasn't expecting us to be able to turn things around, but as it was, our timing getting stuff across the river just worked out just right, and we had just enough time to get everything into position, and by the end of that second day's game our line was on the correct side of the river and looked really very strong indeed. So we was able to consolidate and hold on to the gains that had been made before the battle had started. So that was a very good game, very enjoyable. So we had another face-to-face game in the Shed of War. Posty put on another 6mm First World War game, set in the early days. So I think this was about August 1914, so still very much mobile warfare. Trenches not involved. There were some slit trenches and so on. For the British side, it was the Germans. We were playing the Germans and we were attacking again. I drew out the ticket that meant I was the German commander, and basically the game started with the British holding all of the points on the table. It wasn't about, we were told quite emphatically at the beginning, this wasn't about destroying enemy units, but important positions. So it didn't tell us what had points, so we suspected that things like crossroads, buildings, hills, maybe even woods or certain fields might accrue a point or two here and there. So we knew we had to capture ground, basically. We did massively outnumber the British, although they were better quality. Their firing was better quality, although that wasn't necessarily reflected in their dice rolling. It has to be said, we were rolling really well throughout the game. We went hell for leather on a massive frontal attack. We focused our forces. So there was a river on one side that sort of shielded us from, there was nothing really the other side of that river. Points for terrain, so we were trying to get across. We had a pontoon trying to be built so we could cross the river, and hopefully sweep up a load of 3 points there. There was two roads, a T-junction, a crossroads and some buildings and a big village town on the back edge, and all of that was held by loose units of British infantry in slit trenches and so on and behind hedges, but not nearly enough to stop our troops. We did massively outnumber them. So what we did is we concentrated our forces on an attack on perhaps only half of the table. We had some troops on our right flank to shield us from any potential attacks, and as it was, there were some reserves that came on, some hidden troops that appeared at some point, and for a moment it looked like they might threaten our flank, but they were effectively held back. But the majority of our attack went straight down the table and we swept the British away. Went over one set of hedges, then over a load of trenches. We were making enormous gains, apart from one field that doggedly held on. The British in that field, where we kept rolling awful. For that melee alone, 3 times I believe we went in with double the number of troops of the British, more than outweighing the benefits of them being in slit trenches or behind a hedge or whatever, and every time our dice just didn't live up to it. And at the end of the game, we had gained 14 points and the British had retained 16 points, so they managed to hang on. They'd hung on to enough. If we'd have taken that field, we would have won. That was game, because to be honest, we were playing a blinder throughout the entire game, made a lot of progress, covered a lot of ground. Every attack, barring that one field, went perfectly. You know, bring up some fire, put some artillery down on it, weaken them slightly, and then roll across them with fresh troops or untouched regiments behind them, and smash away the British opposition that we were facing. So we couldn't have travelled any faster across the table. We were pretty much going at maximum speed throughout, but the way we used our units one behind the other, we was able to sort of use one to stop and fire while the others leapfrogged. So we continued to move at pretty much full speed throughout the entire game. And as I say, just that one annoying field would have gained us the points we needed for a narrow victory. But there you go, we didn't know. The fog of war yet again strikes once again. Another example of being beaten by the scenario rather than our opponents. A good game was had by all, it has to be said. We all really enjoyed it. It was a challenging game for both sides. Us because we knew the pressure was on to take territory, and the British because they knew they were massively outnumbered. So a really good and enjoyable game. So I've had 3 really good games to start off the year. I haven't done any solo gaming in the operations room because I've been doing a lot of painting, and we'll move on to that by looking at a workbench update. So as I say, it's time for a workbench update, and as anyone who follows my blog or my channel will know, I've been getting into some 6mm Wars of the Roses, the 6mm figures of Bacchus. I've got a set of rules in mind, but I'm keeping my options open with the way that I've based and built this army. I've worked out, spent months working out my orders of battle and how I was going to base them, and I've now completed the Lancastrian / Tudor army for the Battle of Bosworth, and there's a video, I'll try and remember to put a link somewhere in the video that I put out a week or so ago to show off that army, and I've now started on the King's army, Richard III's army. Whether I get it all painted and completed by the end of the painting challenge, I'm not entirely sure. There's still a lot left to do, but I will have got probably 80% or more of the whole project completed by the end of the painting challenge. And as I've said many times before, and will continue to say many times in the future, the painting challenge is a brilliant way of just keeping the momentum going. That gentle peer pressure of having a weekly posting deadline really helps me to focus, knuckle down, and not prevaricate and disappear off in the internet looking at things that are, all sorts of information and going down rabbit holes with little investigations and bits of research. Focus on the project that's on the table and actually get some painting done. And I have managed to get an enormous amount painted. And as I say, I'll put a link to the video so that you can see what I've done so far with my Wars of the Roses project. There's more on the table. These little beauties, they are, I find them easy to paint, I have to be said, but that's the way I paint. I am at some point planning on doing how I paint 6mm figures, and you'll be shocked at how slapdash I am. I really don't bring out all the detail on the models, but my style is very clear and I think it works really well at arm's length, table length. When you put them on the table, they look nice, and I've gone a lot of effort into the flags for the bases and the basing scheme, so the grass and the scatter and so on, so that the whole base looks really nice. I'm really pleased with how they've come out. And that sort of makes up a little bit for the painting quality. I mean, I get a lot of compliments on how I painted my 6mm stuff, but honestly, up close they're not that good. But it doesn't matter. At 6mm, I ignore a lot of the detail. It has to be said, I ignore a lot of the detail that's on these wonderful Bacchus models. So that, if you're a great painter and you've got an infinite patience, there's an enormous amount of effort that could go into a 6mm model. But I would hasten to add that arm's length on the games table, it ain't going to look a lot different from my method. So I am going to at some point do a video on how I paint my 6mm figures, my method. There's lots of tricks in there for doing it faster and getting a good looking result, particularly when it's based up nicely, and in this case with flags and so on. I think you know, you can downgrade the painting style if you like a little bit. The overall effect looks really good. I'm certainly pleased with the way this project's turning out, and of course when I've got it all finished, I will be doing another video of the whole thing laid out, and then I can move on to actually gaming the Battle of Bosworth. And as I've said, probably said in previous videos, Bosworth is one of those battles that there are lots and lots of different versions of how the battle unfolded. Lots of different maps produced at different times, emphasising different elements. So Bosworth is I've got at least a dozen variations on this battle that I could do right now. You know, I've got a dozen different maps with different layouts for the terrain, depending on where they think the battle was fought, the direction that armies are coming in, and so on. And then of course you then get into the, well, were there these units there? Did this guy turn up with his troops? What if this had happened? You know, what if, for instance, Northumberland had committed his troops? What if the Stanleys hadn't committed their troops? And so on. So there's loads of different variations. There's, you know, like I say, at least a dozen just based on different maps alone that I could play, and many more when you factor in all the other variables that could take place. So painting all these figures for one battle isn't necessarily the straitjacket it might sound like. I could have a lot of gaming fun out of this, really analysing this one battle in lots of different ways. And of course I can go on and use some of these figures for slightly earlier or slightly later battles, Stokefield for instance, by painting up a few more additional models. So there's still plenty of options open to me as a wargamer once I've exhausted the dozens of options that are open to me for playing Bosworth, and I'm really looking forward to getting stuck into that. And as I mentioned earlier, I've got a set of rules in mind, test of resolve, but I might experiment with some others. We'll see how it goes once I start getting figures on the table, and then at some point I'm hoping obviously I can take these figures down to the Shed of War on a much larger table, perhaps involving more approach to the battlefield, to see how the players handle their troops and how they address the wider landscape, not just putting them figures down in a set position and say, right, fight from there. Give them a chance to approach the battlefield site a little bit more of a march in, and like them to decide how do they outmaneuver the enemy and so on. So there's lots of options there, so I'm hoping that, cross fingers, I'll have something like that for the Shed of War and the rest of the rejects before the year is out. Now I've got a channel update, fairly brief this time because, to be honest, I've been making an effort to try and make a few more videos, but the painting is taking the precedent. I haven't done any solo games to record. Having said that, some of my Sunday videos have been surprisingly popular in terms of the number of people viewing, the number of comments. Comments have gone through the roof, and that's brilliant. There's a lot more discussion taking place on the channel, and I really enjoy that. Thank you to everyone who leaves their comments on the channel, by the way. You know, it's one of the highlights of running the channel. It can be hard to keep up. I try to respond to as many comments as I can personally, but it is good to see conversations going on between different subscribers, so that's brilliant. That's what I wanted to do with the channel all along, and some of the videos have generated a lot more subscribers, which is fantastic. You know, catches you by surprise sometimes. You can have periods, weeks where you don't pick up many subscribers at all, and then you put out one video and boom, it goes through the roof. I had one video put out earlier in the year, garnered 50 subscribers in under a week, which is a lot for me. Very much appreciated, and you know, they're still with me, so presumably other content that I've made is keeping them with me, keeping us here. So you know, welcome to anyone who's a new subscriber. Thank you for joining in. I hope you're enjoying the rest of the channel. I have a list of ideas as usual for upcoming videos, but I'm always open to suggestions. If you've got any questions or subjects you want me to have a little think about, bring up, discuss, please let me know. Just drop me a line in the comments or via my blog. I'm more than happy. I always keep notes of any ideas that I get and any suggestions questions, I always make a note of them so that I can have a think about them and perhaps come back to them at a later date. So although I might not necessarily respond to any questions immediately, I will eventually get around to them. So yeah, please, any questions, suggestions for videos and so on, more than happy to give them some thought, and you never know, they may end up getting turned into a video at some point. The only other thing with the channel update that I wanted to mention was that thankfully there has not been a repetition of the trolling that I had, issues I had last year. I think some of the changes that I've made to particularly the way the blog operates seem to have knocked that on the head, thankfully, because I ain't got time for that rubbish. And certainly there hasn't really been any element of that on the channel, which is fantastic. I suppose it's one of those things, you want a channel, the content you're putting out to be popular, but then it gets spread to a wider audience, and not all of them are going to be war gamers, and not all of them are going to have the same agenda as us, wanting to share our wonderful hobby and our enthusiasm for it. There are just some people out there who like to have an argument, but thankfully I haven't encountered any of that to any serious extent on YouTube, and as I say, the changes I made to the blogger seem to have knocked that on the head. And I don't, as a rule, really interact much with Facebook and so on. I do comment a bit on Twitter, but probably not as much as I would like, but I ain't got time. There's only so many hours in the day, and I do so many things as it is. We have to draw a line at some point. So now we're going to go on to a book review, and this is going to come as no surprise to anyone. I really like my Ospreys. I've been thoroughly enjoying the Ospreys book on Bosworth. Very interesting. Lots of really interesting information in there. A really good primer for looking at other works. But they're just really good for gamers. We all know that. That's why we've got so many. I've got a ton of them here. Not as many as some people, I'm sure, but I am literally running out of wall space. So my wife already looks at me askance when I bring home yet more books from a show. Although it has to be said, nothing quite compares to nearly 1,000 cookery books she's got in various hiding places around the house, so I can pretty much buy any book I want, and she doesn't have a leg to stand on. But even so, I am still running out of room to put them all up. So I would thoroughly recommend this particular book, the Ospreys book on Bosworth, their campaign series. Very, very good, very learned. This one has been updated, so there are older versions. This has been updated to include information from the most recent archaeological surveys and the recent battlefield discoveries and so on. So it brings the story fully up to date from the earlier editions of this particular book. So that's it. That's really been keeping me occupied. I haven't had time to do much other reading, it has to be said. The painting has really been taking most of my time up. So that's it for this month. Well, for these last couple of months, that's pretty much what I've been doing since Christmas, because the painting challenge started a couple of days before Christmas, and I really hit the ground running. I had some time off work, and I managed to get a lot of painting done then, and I've just been bashing away trying to get as much painting done as I can. I'm actually off work this week, lucky me. But we do have a few family things to do. I've got to keep them happy. But I'm hoping I'm going to get a little bit more painting than usual done this week, because I've got a little bit more time before I go back to work and back to the grind. So that's it really for this month. I hope you found this update from the Operations Room interesting. Apologies for missing out an entire month. But I hope you can see that I have been busy, perhaps not got quite as much gaming in as I would like, but that's just because I've been putting my priorities elsewhere, i.e. on the paint table. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's video, and of course if you did, please like, subscribe and share, and of course if you want to keep up to date with weekly videos, content from this channel, please tap the bell notification icon. So until next time, stay safe, keep gaming, and of course keep rolling high.